Hello everyone, welcome to this vlog where we're here to talk about Healthy Streets TAs and ATZs in London. We've got myself, Richard, from the transport team in Iceni. We've also got my colleague Lee. Hello Lee.
Hello.
And then we've got the star man from TfL, Gav. Gav, do you want to say hello, a couple of words about who you are, what you do?
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks very much for having me. I'm a new dad. I've got a 5-month-old baby, so it's a bit early in the morning for my liking. The baby does, however, make some of the things we've got to get concerned about with the climate emergency feel a little bit more personal to me, because occasionally it crosses my mind there needs to be a pleasant and decently temperatured earth for her to live on long term. So yeah, it's a little bit early, but I'm doing well. Thanks for having me again. I'm Gavin. I'm from TfL Spatial Planning, and just to give a quick run through of some of my responsibilities and the type of work we do. The team within TfL that I'm from, Spatial Planning, helps people and companies in London's planning system to show that transport and sustainable and active travel are really critical to the future of London and London's built environment. We do that mainly working within the traditional town planning system, but at many different scales. So from opportunity areas, giant entire new neighbourhoods, which involve very complex strategic transport capacity studies, sometimes specific funding arrangements, such as using CIL tariffs, and then all the way down to smaller, even household scale, mini applications, if they directly affect the Transport for London road network, the red routes, or directly affect a station or a bus stop or something TfL related. So my area is Central London and Waltham Forest. I'm the town planning lead for TfL for Camden, Islington, Hackney, the City of London and Waltham Forest, as I said. Occasionally do a little bit of work in Westminster and stuff if I get involved in an appeal or something a bit meatier with a bit more conflict. But yeah, that's the deal really. TfL Spatial Planning. So we should be the first port of call for property developers, council regeneration and planning teams, and anybody really redeveloping, regenerating and densifying parts of London, so that we can support them to do the appropriate analysis and put the appropriate emphasis on certain modes of transport. Do the appropriate transport analysis. So that's my my job and my role. I hope that's a helpful introduction.
Yeah, that's
absolutely
great. That's really good. Yeah, and obviously today we're here to talk about healthy streets within transport assessments and the ATZ. So again, I don't know if you just want to give a very quick overview of what that is in terms of your role, given it's been about for a couple of years now.
Yeah, no problem. And it's been a pretty turbulent couple of years, and I'll touch on a few reasons why maybe later in the discussion, because obviously we've had the pandemic and there's significant funding challenges for TfL. So it feels like a long time ago that we were working in a more classic sort of planning system, and we were trying to ensure implementation of the new London plan. We've got a great new plan. It's not so new anymore because it's been adopted for a decent length of time as well. But 2 years ago, what we did was we launched a new transport assessment template. It's very lean. It doesn't include too much guidance on exactly what to include, to give consultants and planning applicants some scope and flexibility to develop new techniques themselves. But it has chapter headings in it, which are organised at spatial scales. And the idea with that was that if we look at how people travel to and from new development sites at the immediate front door of the development, and that could include all types of access requirements, including those for disabled people, and then looking at a sort of walking and cycling neighbourhood scale, which we call the active travel zone, and then also, finally, the biggest and third scale that we want to see new development sites linking up with is the London-wide network scale. And that's where you find more traditional kind of trip generation analysis and potentially, you know, Section 106 contributions for bus enhancements or London Underground capacity upgrades if necessary. That was a bit of a change because we previously were receiving a lot of transport assessments organised modally. So they would say, there will be this impact on trams, there will be this impact on buses, there will be this impact on rail, and going on and on and on and on. We found that didn't quite fit with the big new concept that we're pushing in the policies of the London Plan, and also in almost all of how TfL is organised, to be honest, including how we assess the success of and design and deliver improvements of our own, big projects of our own, and that's Healthy Streets and Vision Zero. So Healthy Streets and Vision Zero are pretty simple but important ideas or sort of conceptual frameworks around which the transport policies of the new London Plan and all the subsequent follow-up guidance. We are getting supplementary planning guidance from the Mayor, which is called London Planning Guidance, LPGs. All of those transport-related policy documents and rules that everybody obviously has to play the game by when they're redeveloping parts of London is now organised around Healthy Streets and Vision Zero. And you can explain them very simply. I think powerful ideas are simple ideas. Vision Zero is the idea that by 2041, we will have no death or serious injury on any part of London's transport network. So we're hoping to include stations and, you know, people on buses, as well as the highway network, both the strategic and local highway networks within that. And Healthy Streets is really about reframing our transport planning so that it's very walking and cycling led, and it's rooted in the physical environment of streets. I think there's a lot of sort of precedent for that in urban design. We've seen urban design really become a mature and sort of respected and complex discipline, like surveying or planning or architecture. Urban design sort of really become a discipline in its own right within that mix of different professions and expertise we all work in planning and regeneration. So there's a lot of ideas from urban design which really sort of bleed into transport planning now through Healthy Streets. Things like permeability and legibility for pedestrians, and most importantly with Healthy Streets, the idea that the more active people are, the healthier they are. So the transport system offers the biggest opportunity to improve human life, basically. And where we need to do that is in our streets, in our streets as pleasant environments. So there's a big set of Healthy Streets indicators, which I won't run through, but I think that explains it hopefully just about well enough. And 2 years ago, we had Healthy Streets and Vision Zero written through the transport policies in our new London Plan like a stick of rock. So we tried to take an extra step and give our collaborators, the planning applicants, the consultants who represent them, the clients, the developers, we tried to give them a little bit of a steer without being too forceful, just to point them in the right direction and show them a few steps that they could take to make their applications and their development proposals genuinely part of this Vision Zero and Healthy Streets policy framework. Obviously, that's necessary in order to get planning permission, but it's also a collaborative journey, I think, between the different parts of the sector, you know, between the public sector, the private sector, and, you know, the people with the money and commercial objectives who may not only just want planning permission, you know, they may also want to be part of something bigger with, you know, a really good place outcome. A good place outcome is pretty matched up with Healthy Streets. Healthy Streets are pleasant, walkable, sittable, playable kind of streets that attract people to go and do physical activity outdoors. So they're also pretty decent for a nice new development if you want to, you know, attract purchasers, renters of office space, and it really aligns us quite well, the different collaborators within the planning system. And yeah, Vision Zero obviously is about safety. So there's a moral imperative there. And then there's all the climate emergency stuff, which we might talk about a little bit later. But I've talked a lot, so I'll stop.
No, I'm just thinking actually, Gavin, in the context of where we are now in the pandemic and just potentially coming out of the back end of it, how do you see the Healthy Streets assessment? How do you see it going forward? What adaptability potentially has it had, and also how will it move forward, and what could it be used for, as a means of a tool going forward for TfL?
Well, I think that since that moment 2 years ago, there has been a lot of turbulence. So I don't have a fantastic answer to that question. That's probably a bit too honest. I'll be honest about the journey that TfL's been on in that time. We've seen Healthy Streets migrate a little bit out, although we're still very much focused on Healthy Streets, and all of our personal performance is measured against Healthy Streets. You can't deny that we've had huge turbulence. The ridership of public transport services dropped dramatically. We ended up in a budgetary crisis. So there was a little more of a sort of emergency mentality. We all switched to working from home, as everyone else has, like we're doing on this call. And we haven't done anywhere near as much follow-up on those announcements made 2 years ago as I'd like, because there's been other challenges. But some of those other challenges and changes have massively affected Healthy Streets as a policy agenda. There's been, as I mentioned, a budgetary crisis within TfL, which is public knowledge. And that's really transferred power and generated a bit more bravery amongst the boroughs. So a couple of things I really wanted to highlight on the call are the Healthy Streets scorecard, which is not published or administered or analysed by TfL, but it's a league table of how the different boroughs are doing. It's in its third year, and it's really taken on a life of its own, Healthy Streets. Again, that's through a mix of incentives and penalties. Boroughs can't get LIP funding without proving that what they want to spend it on is Healthy Streets and Vision Zero compliant, or it's enabling and supporting Healthy Streets. But then the coronavirus led to a large amount of emergency funding being directed from central government to the boroughs. As a result of that, I think where this agenda kind of lives at the moment is in those low traffic neighbourhoods and in those emergency measures. And frankly, huge amounts of officer time, energy, political capital and focus within the public sector has gone off on that tangent with coronavirus. Now, that's no bad thing, because we've seen incredible proof of how quickly the system can implement changes in an emergency. We've seen, if you look at the Healthy Streets scorecard, it ranks every borough in London for the number of school streets they've introduced, the amount of 20-mile-an-hour road. We've got huge coverage of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits across London now compared to before the pandemic. A lot of that's been introduced on temporary measures. And then just one final thing, another good example of how that's become a bit of a distraction or another focus, because I don't want to speak negatively for TfL, is we introduced a general traffic ban, including taxis, on the A10, which went from basically Shoreditch all the way down to London Bridge, right through the middle of the city. And that's on my planning patch. We ended up in a court case with taxi drivers, which we initially lost, then successfully appealed. So I think that what's happened is Healthy Streets has kind of, it's really taken on a life of its own outside TfL as well as in this planning guidance. And so what you'll find is that there's a lot better understanding of things like modal filters, things like low traffic speeds, and of the building blocks that can make up the outcome of a healthy street, or really give us the best chance of reaching Vision Zero with no deaths or serious injuries. But in all honesty, in the past 2 years, it hasn't been driven forcefully from within our applications work. And it's been played out in those other arenas, these big changes which have affected society. But I think they've made people a little bit more switched on about enlightened walking and cycling led transport planning, and also just massive change. People are spending more time on their streets, and they're beginning to understand and value the importance of high quality streets. So yeah, it's not the best answer maybe, but it's an honest answer. In the past 2 years, we've had planning applications that have joined in with this agenda, but it's really, really rocketed forwards and sort of gone forwards in other areas. Like low traffic neighborhoods are filled with healthy streets. They're very, very safe. And the best thing we can do if we see a low traffic neighborhood where a developer wants to redevelop something is think about that point at the end of the temporary or experimental traffic order, because those projects are generally implemented on an 18-month timescale, and within which consultation responses are gathered by the Highway Authority. There's a lot of protesters who say, you are not consulting us. That's not true. They're being consulted during the experiment, but a landowner or a developer who is developing into that turbulent context might actually want to support the low traffic neighbourhood. And we really need to be considering how these temporary measures which have gone out across London, like the A10 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. traffic ban, how can they be made permanent? Because at the moment, that's not guaranteed. They're on an 18-month experiment, and if the backlash is too strong and we don't promote and really build recognition of the benefits, then we'll miss an opportunity for Healthy Streets and Vision Zero. So yeah, I'm happy with my answer because that's the point I really wanted to make. And for the people that see the vlog, if you can get on board with that, it looks like a community issue, but if you own land or you're developing land within that, as far as is appropriate, with our neutrality that we have to maintain, and we need to respect this consultation process on traffic orders. Of course, it makes sense for us and councils that have introduced these measures and developers and landowners to kind of try and be allies in getting those temporary experimental measures to potentially become permanent long-term measures. And that's what happened in New York with Times Square. So there's other countries that have been doing this a little bit better than us and more bravely than us since before coronavirus. But now with coronavirus, we have an opportunity.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to follow up on that actually. You said in the context of the boroughs and how that's been working, do you foresee the Healthy Streets assessment maybe rolling out in other parts of the UK and kind of integrating into different councils?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the main things that I'm seeing the other regional authorities do, particularly Manchester and Birmingham, are either about digitising the planning system with better GIS, for example, to allocate sites and find opportunities for growth, or they're about digitising the planning system to improve consultation, which I sound like a broken record, but that again comes really from these low traffic neighbourhoods and experimental measures. That's really accelerated the adoption of digital consultation tools like Commonplace. But to be honest, the other big regional authorities have problems that are at a wider scale, as I see it initially. In Manchester, for example, they're desperate to get better bus franchising. In Birmingham, they need to find more land for housing. So we haven't really seen the maturity in those planning systems enabling them to sort of get down to the sort of site scale. We've had interest from places around London, places just outside London and the home counties, and we share a lot of information and skills with them anyway, because relationships get built due to projects like Crossrail 2 or Crossrail, which obviously go outside London and cross that London boundary. So the way I see it, there is strong interest in what we do more locally. And I think you'd expect it to sort of spread around the southeast, these specific tools and techniques for planning applications and planning application documents. Whereas more widely across the UK, I think it'll take a little bit of time. I think it's at that grander scale with things like HS2, you know, things like regional transport plans. So they need to write their own MTS, and they need to get their own functioning transport agency like TfL and build it and staff it and empower it. And I think there's more interest more locally, I think is the answer.
Yeah,
so but it's definitely worthwhile if you're thinking about the southeast, you know, they're very interested in what we do.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes in the next few years, won't it? I think just sort of wrapping up then, in terms of moving forward, I would quite like to know how you would like it to work, taking it more back to development and new development level. So if there's a new development and that through the ATZ identifies improvements that can be made to the local network, that will be a benefit to development, but also the local area. How do you want that to work in terms of implementation of those improvements between the developer, yourself, and the local authorities?
Yeah, so I think what we would like to see is a much more mixed funding profile. And that has been our hope and vision since we launched this 2 years ago. And that will rely on us having centralized mappable information on where ATZ improvements have been identified. And then we've got a new member of staff who came from LLDC, the London Legacy Development Corporation, she's very experienced in spotting opportunities for match funding. So things are very uncertain due to our budget and due to the fact that councils have been implementing these temporary schemes. But we would like to publish data more frequently, open data, on where these improvements have been suggested, because we remain agnostic about the appropriate funding for their delivery. It's about getting good ideas out there in the system. Now, I don't want developers to think that they shouldn't contribute, but we are starting to see much better accounting when it comes to the spending of Borough. And that really helps with the annual statement that councils need to publish, because it specifies where they're spending on strategic transport infrastructure. A really good recent example is Waltham Forest, and you can just download that as a Word document from their public website. It shows exactly what they're spending their borough SIL on, and that enables us to spot gaps and spot opportunities. But what will really, I think, unlock the multiple contributions from multiple developments now that the Section 106 pooling restriction has been lifted, which is kind of good news for everybody, because it's about sharing the burden of the cost of delivering these healthy streets. What will really unlock that is if we can get much better mapping of where improvements are suggested, and much better mapping for everyone to work off in the first place of these active travel zones, which are essentially just walkable neighbourhoods. So the two things that we're working on with that are TfL is going to take hopefully a data feed of all the pre-apps which are coming through City Hall, as many of the pre-apps we can get from the boroughs as possible. And we just didn't end up progressing with this as quickly as we expected due to the pandemic. The other thing I'd really like to do, and I've got a board authority paper drafted, is to get the Legible London landmarks and the Legible London base map published as open data, so that that can be the active travel zone assessment base map for every strategically referable planning application in London. And I think that is the big challenge. It goes with this trend for digitising the planning system as well. But the more joined up everyone's mapping is, and the more everybody's working from the same sort of data sets and data feeds, the easier it will be to find these joint funding solutions when there is limited funding from TfL, funding can change in a heartbeat, as we've seen with coronavirus. It used to go this way, and now it goes from TfL straight to boroughs for emergency measures. And, you know, viability is always a consideration for developers. So the ideal scenario is a very mixed funding profile from Boroughsil, some TfL budgets, some local transport improvement budgets, and pooled contributions from a number of developments. But that relies on us continuing to work to improve the mapping, to improve the data sharing. And so that's probably really the next chapter with this ATZ assessment stuff, because you consultants have got good at doing it and providing it, and that's great. But in order for us to actually deliver the improvements, we need to be on the same map, I think. So fingers crossed we can get that done now that the pandemic is calming down. And yeah, people really are going to need these streets, so we better get to work improving them. I hope I haven't talked too much. I apologise. It's a good topic, and it's really great to be asked. So thank you.
It's been very informative, actually, Gavin. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been very good. Thank you very much, Gavin. Thank you for your time.
No trouble. See you guys soon for another meeting. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.